SUPERVIVE is an incredibly deep game, meaning it is very difficult to learn, and even harder to pick a character to start out playing. So today we are going to break down each role and rank each character from easiest to hardest to play. The rankings will take into account how hard their cooldowns are to understand conceptually, as well as how hard it is to follow through with them mechanically when first picking them up. Keep in mind that no character in SUPERVIVE is easy and that this is all relative, so don't go roasting me in the comments if I grill your main. With that out of the way, let's start out with the first role being the fighters. First up, we have Ghost, and the reason why I'm putting him as the easiest character in the fighting role is because he has a very simple idea. You have to just shoot the enemies, throw a nade every now and then, you have a huge circle for your ultimate, all things considered, and it's just the basic soldier idea. I mean, all you really have to do to get a lot of value on this character is hold your M1, and everything else is just an added bonus. It can be difficult to hit shots sometimes and learn the spray pattern, but it's not as difficult as a lot of the other characters we're about to mention after Ghost. The basic idea is really simple to understand, and it's receptive, which makes him easier to pick up, especially if you're an FPS player that's transferring to a game that's like this MOBA format. It's pretty simple, and you'll have a basic understanding of how this character should work, even with a different camera angle. Next up, we have Kingpin, which I know is probably going to surprise a lot of people, but hear me out. He has a really easy to understand idea. You start the fight with a hook, and if you miss the hook, you take it a little slow unless something happens where you can brawl out afterwards with your shotgun and slam. When you're on Kingpin, you're pretty much just playing Roadhog from Overwatch, but now your hook can go through walls. That being said, it is difficult to get used to the hook's projectile speed when first starting, but when you're playing against beginners, it's also really easy to just hit hooks in general since they don't know it's coming and don't know how to move around it yet. The basic idea of Kingpin is super easy to understand, and it takes advantage of those new players pretty easily. Following Kingpin in the fighter role, we have Felix, our favorite little firefox. Ideas start to get a little bit more complicated within the fighter role, starting with this character. Reason being is that you have to close the distance and you get outranged by a lot of the class. That being said, it's much easier to hit abilities compared to others, considering your flamethrower has a pretty forgiving cone. It's mostly just about movement. So the main idea with Felix is that he does have a super forgiving kit, but he does have some hard ideas in terms of closing the distance that you're gonna have to get used to in order to get that value by simply existing. After Felix, we have Shrike. She is also a fairly simple idea, similar to Ghost. You just kind of shoot, you throw your bomb, you give vision to your team, and it's the basic sniper idea that you got from all your other first-person shooter games. That being said, it has a layer of difficulty where you actually have to hit your shots, especially when starting off, because you don't really know how characters move yet. The idea is simpler, so it's easier to focus on what you're supposed to be doing, which is really hard to know sometimes in SUPERVIVE. Leading the next spot in the hunt is Huntress. She has a very similar idea to Shrike for new players in terms of positioning, but that being said, she's a lot more difficult because she has a utility that you have to learn the timing of. You also have to learn the timing of her primary attack, which is a whole new level of complexity compared to that of Shrike. As I said before, Huntress is just a lot more utility driven than Shrike, which makes her naturally more difficult to pick up when you're first starting to play the game. It's still kind of the basic idea of Shrike. You just want to poke people out as much as possible and use your utility when it comes up and it's useful. The next fighter is electric in the difficulty lineup, and it is Joule. Her kit is a little bit more difficult to understand than everyone else we've discussed so far, simply because of her passives that build stacks of charge that essentially give her all of her damage. What you have to do is you have to build enough stacks until you have to dash through the enemy, which does a huge burst of damage, and if you don't read this before playing, you are just going to do pretty much nothing on this character. How hard it is depends on the patch, so I'm assuming it might get a little bit more difficult as time goes on, but as of right now, it's pretty simple to pull off. It does require a player to know what to look for and to execute it effectively and consistently without wasting any cooldowns, which can be a little bit difficult. All things aside though, building the charge isn't too hard since the abilities are pretty forgiving. It's just the idea of getting that execute that makes her difficult in my opinion. No list is spicy without a controversial take, which means the next hardest fighter in my opinion is Shiv. She may be really difficult to pick up mechanically, but the idea is not that hard. hard. Hear me out. If you have skills from another top-down game and think you have the aim, it's super doable. It's not easy though, trust me. You have to understand breakpoints with the dagger, her ultimate, etc. And they're actually making her a little bit difficult with each and every patch. That being said, it's super easy to just stomp noobs with this character, as that's realistically what she's for. And even though the concept isn't understand, it's really hard to get in there off of a flank and do the damage. Slicing his way to the top of the fighter difficulty list, we have Brall. He has so many different abilities to learn, and on top of that, it's difficult to even know which one you're supposed to use when. The only easy part about his kit is that it's really simple to understand the overall need to get in there. Button mashing your abilities will probably only find kills on noobs for a little bit, but only one worthy of mastering, Brall's blade, will be able to make him work in the higher level lobbies. Finishing off the fighters, which might come to a surprise for some people, is Bishop. Before the vets come in and flame me for this one, hear me out. For a beginner, she is very hard to understand, because how do you really place yourself? You have melee capabilities, but also ranged capabilities, which makes it really difficult to know where you're supposed to be and when if you're brand new and don't know how other characters work. Abilities can feel super wonky and difficult to hit as well, since the servers aren't super responsive in the alpha version of the game. Splash may be forgiving, but it doesn't do a lot of damage either. So you really have to be accurate at range, you have to be accurate at close up, and you have to know when you can and cannot go in as a beginner. And you don't know these things yet because you don't know your matchups until you really start playing, so it's actually really difficult with Bishop. But now that the fighters are out of the way, let's start off the protectors we have, with Elluna being the easiest one. When you think of a support, you think of Elluna. Has a pretty decent heal, has decent damage, and her whole job is to live as long as possible and res her team. Like, come on. That's what every default person on the role does when they play the support of a game. Root is also relatively easy to hit and impactful. So if you're looking for a character that you really just have to exist on, it's pretty much Elluna. And you know what? I might get cooked in the comments for this one. Flying up next through the Skylands, we have Zeph. He's a tier up from Elluna. His heal is strong, but it's more efficient when sent through multiple allies, which sends a little bit more complexity to his kit. His positioning is harder to understand as a result. The grenade also requires a bit more timing than Root that you can just kind of throw out whenever. Dash can actually grief teammates, so if you mess up, it actually is a detriment to your team, unlike Elluna, where there really is no detriment if you just play the character, but you still could just heal and get a lot of value on Zeph, so it's not quite as hard as the next protector we have on the list. So, pushing away the competition, we have the Giga Chad of protectors himself, Oath. Now, if you couldn't tell, I might be a little bit biased because, you know, I'm a little bit of an Oath main, but I don't know how else to explain that Oath is the hardest protector because, let's be honest here, what really is he? Is he a tank? Is he a support peeler? To be honest, I'm not really sure because it depends on the build that you want to run. A lot of people will default to just holding the shield like Reinhardt from Overwatch, and that's just not how you should play, at least currently. You should definitely try to shield some big key cooldowns, but you also just don't know those cooldowns when you first start playing, so it's going to be really difficult to pick them up right off the bat. Because Oath's identity just isn't quite as solid as all of the other characters yet, he has a lot of jobs that he can do, and it's just naturally harder to pick which one he's supposed to be doing. Do not let this discourage you from being an absolute Giga Chad and learning the coolest character in the game. That's just factual. And if you are willing to learn the character, trust me, he's going to feel very, very rewarding. What I will say is just try to give the devs some time to really understand where they want to go with this character, and then maybe it'll get a little bit easier. Is it getting hot in here or is it just me? God damn, Anyways, let's cool things off, starting with the controllers with Celeste. Now, don't get me wrong, Celeste is not an easy character by any means, but understand that the game only has 2 controllers, so there isn't really a whole lot of competition. What makes Celeste a little bit easier than her counterpart is that her abilities are very forgiving to hit. Controlling space is just naturally difficult to understand when first starting out, but at least you have some stuff that's forgiving that makes you feel like you're doing something. Her ultimate is also kind of hard to understand for new players because it's not really meant for just kills. It's meant to force people off of space, which is hard to understand from my experience when first starting, especially when coaching new players in Overwatch. The thing is that last but certainly not least, we have Void that's just even more difficult to understand. He's easily one of the hardest characters in the game in my opinion. But why is that, you might ask? Well, one of the reasons is that his dash is super unique and teleports his entire team. It took me about 3 months to learn what this did, and even on other characters, I straight up just didn't understand what was going on. On top of that, he has really slow movement, so you have to understand how you're supposed to use your glider around the map. It's also really difficult to hit all of the cooldowns because it requires such precise timing. Overall, he's just a really hard character to wrap my head around, and I'm sure a lot of beginners are going to have the same problem I do. But what good is a tier list ranking all of the characters in the game from easiest to hardest if they're not all on the same list at the end? Well, here you have it. Keep in mind that this list is based on beginners, and it's based on both mechanics and concepts, not just one thing. I remember starting on Oath, hating it because it made no sense. Playing Kingpin and Elluna for a few tests before I tried Oath again with a lot more success. For experienced players, this list will no doubt look a lot different. But for most people at this point, that doesn't matter because we're all just starting out. The game isn't even out yet. Do you know who you are going to be playing this week in SUPERVIVE? Or are you still just kind of having trouble choosing? Well, if that's the case, just play Oath. Seriously though, if that is the case, there will be a video coming out in the next few days to help you all out with finding your perfect character, if not for this test, for upcoming tests as well. But if that is too long of a wait, channel members will have access to that video and all others I plan on releasing this week early. Just something a little extra I do for the homies. You know what I'm saying? Thank you to all the real ones that made it to the end of the video. I hope to see you all sticking around the channel and SUPERVIVE as well. But until next time, I've got to peace out and Paz out. I'll see you in the next one.